I began to take a corner. As I turned the wheel, I felt like the whole car rocked to one side and began sliding. My wheels screeched and gravel began getting thrown against the car. I was now completely out of control, and then smash! I was 16, had just gotten my learner's permit, and was ready to hit the road. But my parents had other ideas. They didn't want me to drive anywhere, really. They said that I was not allowed to drive at night, or in the rain, or when it was rush hour traffic. I was so frustrated. I felt suffocated because they gave me so little freedom. They won't let me drive anywhere or do anything, I thought to myself. This was supposed to be the start of me growing up and becoming independent, yet the most I was allowed to do was drive to the store for groceries with them in the passenger seat. A few days later, I came up with a great idea. My mom woke me up for school like every other day. I got dressed, had breakfast, and headed for the door. I made sure to stay ahead of my dad so I could sneakily reach for the keys. I was just inches away from grasping it before my dad's clunky arms came towering over me, snatching the keys in less than a second. "Ha, nice try," he chuckled. Ugh. I climbed into the back seat of the car and sulked the whole way to school. We pulled up outside the gates, and before I could dash from the car, my mom said, "Come here, honey." She then leaned to the back and gave me a big peck on the cheek in front of everyone. I could feel the heat rising to my head as I turned as red as a tomato. I scurried from the car with my head held low before I hear, "Bye, honey." Then a roar of laughter from a large group of kids who watched the whole thing. I felt my cheeks boil from embarrassment. I awkwardly walked through the school halls, trying to recover and forget the embarrassment I just endured before bumping into my friend James. We walked to the first period together as usual. "Hey, have you heard about this party tonight? We should definitely go." As soon as I heard about it, I knew I wanted to go. But I also knew what my parents' response would be if I asked them. I thought about it all day. I couldn't focus on anything else. By the time I arrived home, I had devised a plan. I would wait until my parents were asleep, and then I would make my own way to the party, in their car. The wait seemed to go on forever. I was excited and nervous as I hadn't been to a school party like this before. Then, finally, my parents went to their room. I gave them 30 minutes and then approached their door. I quietly peeked into their room, and they were fast asleep. Now was my chance. I tiptoed through the house, being sure not to make a sound, gripped the keys tightly so they didn't make a jingle, opened the door, and carefully turned the handle as the door closed as not to make a click. I was out as I climbed behind the wheel and felt a rush of excitement travel through my body. All the way there, I couldn't believe I'd done it. I pulled my car up outside the house where the party was at, and I felt amazing. I got out and walked up the drive with a bounce in my step. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the host. "Glad you could make it," he said. As I walked through the party, I saw drinks, and not just any drinks. It was the worst kind. I kind of expected it as it was a party, but I wasn't old enough, and I hadn't tried it before. I managed to ignore it while I danced with my friend James, but after lots of offers, I just couldn't resist. "Okay, I'll have a small one." I took one, and then another, and another, until pretty quickly, I was completely gone. I looked down deliriously at my phone, and all I saw were motion trails in front of my eyes. I gave it a few seconds, squinted my eyes, and then managed to focus on the time. It was 12:09, and I had to get home. "Oh no, I has to get home," my voice slurred to James, who was also gone. I walked down the path I had walked up only a few hours before, consciously trying to focus and walk in a straight line. Getting back in the car this time was different. The excitement had gone. I slumped into the seat behind the wheel, and I felt small and cold. I knew this was a bad idea, but I also knew I had to get the car home, parked up, and me inside the house before anyone realized I was gone. I turned the ignition, took a deep breath, and began to drive. Street lights flew past my windows in a confused blur as I tried my hardest to focus on the center line and stay on my side of the road. I heard cars honking their horns. They must have seen something was wrong. I began to take a corner. As I turned the wheel, it felt like the whole car rocked to one side and began slipping. My wheels screeched and gravel began getting thrown against the car. I was now completely out of control. Then, smash! From terrifying noises that will stay with me forever to silence and calm, apart from ringing in my ears and the hissing of my broken radiator. I felt disoriented. I didn't know where I was or what had just happened. Then suddenly, I came round with a jolt. I was pinned to a seat. I began to panic and heard someone shout, "Quickly, somebody call the paramedics!" I had just crashed the car. I began drifting in and out of consciousness until pretty soon I passed out. I began to open my eyes and I was laid flat on my back on a gurney. There was a red light flashing on and off, lighting up objects around me. Then, when I managed to focus, I saw the terrified look of my parents' faces standing over me, illuminated by the red lights from the ambulance. My mom had tears streaming down her face. The look on my mom's face hit home what had just happened. Then suddenly, my body felt like it was on fire. The ride in the ambulance was a blur of pain and my memory replaying everything that had just happened. My life flashed before my eyes again and again, and every time I kept waking up with a jolt like it had just happened. When I arrived at the hospital, I was rushed through the hospital to the emergency room. The last thing I remember is looking at my mom, who was getting further and further away from me as I was wheeled down a hospital corridor. Then I saw the doors close, and then nothing. My eyes began to open, and just like that following night, there was my mom standing over me, makeup smeared down her face. She quickly called for the doctor to come and see me. "You have a broken leg, 3 broken ribs, concussion, and your liver was hemorrhaging, so we had to take you for emergency surgery. You are very lucky to be alive." Everything felt like a bad dream, but I knew I wasn't because I was in so much discomfort. I had to spend a few days in the hospital hooked up to IVs and a heart rate monitor. I know they must have, but it felt like my parents didn't leave my side for the whole time I was there. When we finally got home, I went upstairs to my room and rested. I got a text from James. He asked if I was okay. I said that I was fine, and I just ended the text with that. But really, I wasn't fine. Sure, I was broken and bruised, but most of all, I was completely scarred by what had happened. All I kept thinking about was that I could have been seriously hurt, more than I already am, or worse. For a long time after this, I was having nightmares. I would replay the whole event every time I closed my eyes and end up waking with cold sweats. My parents tried to speak with me and get me to open up, but I shut them out. I didn't want to talk. At first, they were concerned about me and gave me some space. But soon, it became clear that when they said, "Do you want to talk?" they really meant, "We need to talk." They called me into the living room where they sat waiting. I remember the looks on their faces. They looked so disappointed in me. They talked about how I should be more responsible and that I should have never gone behind their backs and took the car without asking in the first place. Pretty soon, their calm, talking voice turned into them yelling at me, saying how it could have been much worse. I looked back at them with anger for not understanding. I yelled, "I don't care, it's your fault anyway," at them. I looked back and saw my mom with tears in her eyes as I left the room and stumbled upstairs with my crutches. I felt that if they had given me more freedom in the first place, this might never have happened. They definitely had no right to yell at me. I went into my room and sat on my bed thinking about the accident. I thought my parents would be mad now I shouted at them, but my mom followed me straight in and sat next to me. She just rubbed my back and hugged me tight. "Mom, please make it go away," I said. As the weeks went on, I became angry and upset with myself. I would lash out at my parents over the smallest things, and there was no way I was going to travel anywhere in a car. So I made us take public transport if we went anywhere. Eventually, my parents persuaded me to come with them to see a therapist and discuss how I had been feeling. I sat in his chair and began to blame everyone else for what had happened. My parents for making me feel so suffocated and giving me no freedom. My friend for inviting me to the party. The people at the party for getting me too drunk even though I was a minor. The doctor told me that I was still suffering from issues caused by the crash and prescribed me with some medication to take over the coming months, along with weekly therapy sessions. After a few weeks, I returned to school with my cast on my leg and crutches by my side. I walked into the school. I felt like everyone was staring at me. I just wanted it to all go away and not to be constantly reminded of what had happened. Before I knew it, James came up to me and asked, "Hey man, how are you doing? Do you need anything?" But I just shrugged him off with a, "I'm okay," and then turned away from him. James looked confused and hurt at the same time. Later, at lunch, I just sat by myself, not wanting to talk to anyone, even if they were interested in my well-being. After school, I told my parents that I would walk home, but they insisted on picking me up and driving me in their car. I knew this was going to be a problem, but I didn't feel like arguing about it, so agreed to get a ride. But when my parents pulled up in the car, everything came flooding back to me of the accident, and I freaked out. "No!" I yelled. "I'm not getting in the car!" I saw my dad getting out of the car, so I decided to try and run. But since I had my crutches, I didn't get far. I began to attempt a run, but then my crutches missed a beat, sending me tumbling to the ground. My head hit the floor with a thud. My crutches went skidding past me, and I began to cry. It brought back all of my pains from the crash, but I was also embarrassed this had happened at school. My dad rushed over to me and placed his jacket under my head. He carried me to the car as James handed me my crutches, and I thanked him in a soft voice. He was still there for me, even though I had acted in this way. Everyone was, even my family, who must have been through an awful time. As we pulled out of the parking lot, everyone looked at me. After my big freak out, I didn't know how I was ever going to go back to school again and see people, but something happened on that drive home. I sat thinking. I realized how lucky I was to have not only got a second chance, but also have such a loving family and friends who would stick by my side and care for me like they had. That night, I texted James and thanked him again to make sure he knew I meant it. After 3 months, I've started getting better. I'm not so afraid to get into a car anymore, and I can even drive again without feeling scared. This has made a huge impact on my life, and I have learned lessons that I want people to learn through me and not have to experience them for themselves. Taking the car that night was stupid, but then letting myself drink and then trying to drive again could have had major consequences on my life. It has taken months for me to get back to being close to my old self. I've realized that I cannot blame anyone else for my actions. Everyone was looking out for my best interests, and just because I didn't get my own way really gave me no right to go behind my parents' back and take the car, especially to go drinking. If I had listened to them, this would never have happened. Please, if you ever drink, do not get behind the wheel.